Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about Bucky Irving, running back out of Oregon, in terms of his production profile. His nickname, Bucky, was given by his parents because his eyes were wider than normal when they got him back from the hospital at birth. One of many players this year that have been given nicknames by their parents, but he likes it. So he likes to be called Bucky, and that's what he's referred to as. So getting into production data at the running back position, I use offensive market share scores to do production data. Offensive market share scores are where you take a raw statistic divided by the team total statistic, and then you use that data and compare it to every positional peer to give you a percentile score. That score is weighted against the age score of a prospect to give you their offensive market share score. Based on that data, Bucky Irving was okay. He had a 50 percentile total offensive market share production score, 70 percentile in terms of his receiving market share score, and a 33 percentile touchdown market share score. All those numbers are really not that great, except for his receiving market share score, which is decent. Means he can be a receiving back, but his other areas are not that great. Then, of course, when you look at his efficiency scores take into account things like touchdown percentage, which is the percentage of touches divided by the total touchdowns, and then also the yards per reception, and also the yards per touch. So looking at his efficiency scores, he did pretty well in certain areas. So his rushing yards per reception was decent. So basically RRAV, which is basically yards per reception. I know it's a little confusing, but his number there is decent. His RAV, which is yards per reception, which is in terms of him as a pass catcher, was below average actually. And then his touchdown percentage, touchdowns per touch, was not that fantastic. It was slightly above average, but not exactly where you need it to be. I think the biggest concern in all of his data comes down to his yards per reception, which was not the best that it needs to be. He did have a lot of production in terms of as a receiver, but it kind of looked to be mostly behind the line of scrimmage based on his overall efficiency scores. So it's kind of uneven. Just like his regular data, his efficiency data is a little uneven. Then, of course, when you go to adjusted production scores, this is essentially the context production score. So this adds their age, it adds in strength of schedule, SRS, which is a single ranking system that College Football Reference uses to grade teams to figure out how good of a team they're on. The MSA score is the market share data of a prospect plus their strength of schedule plus their strength of team plus their age. And the PASS score adds all of their production data, their market share scores, efficiency scores, age scores, SRS and SOS scores, which again is strength of schedule, strength of team scores, adds all those things together to give you how productive were they for their level of competition, how productive were they for their age. Those are the questions that the adjusted production scores kind of answer. And when you look at Irving in terms of that, he's a little inconsistent. I think in terms of his age, he has a good age score. He's in the 90 plus percentile in terms of his age, but his MSA ranking is 69.74 out of 100, and his pass ranking is 77.75 out of 100. And when you look at the averages for all pro players, they're in the 90 to 80 percentile in terms of their pass scores. When you look at the Pro Bowl players, the averages are in the 87 percentile for pass and MSA scores. And then when they look at the starter averages, the average MSA score for a starter is 78 percentile, and pass score is 79 percentile. So it's inconsistent. There are some concerns with Bucky Irving long term because of his overall production profile. Going on to some comparisons. So I went back and looked at all the running backs I could possibly look at with a similar production profile. I looked for running backs that had average to below average total offensive market share, but had above 70 percentile receiving yardage, to say up to 80 percentile in terms of the receiving yardage. Also took a look at touchdown market share, trying to look for guys who didn't have elite touchdown market share, had below average or average touchdown market share, to kind of give you this list of names that you see right here. Some of these names that you'll know, Alvin Kamara is on here. Alvin Kamara is a prospect that Based on his overall data, he was elite in terms of his passing yardage, average in terms of being a touchdown contributor, but he had a good age, just like Bucky Irving had, and was able to do something with it. He also tested really well as an athlete. So that's another thing that's going to really be important for Bucky Irving is how he tests as an athlete, because if he's not as explosive as Alvin Kamara was, then you run into some question marks in terms of trying to make that kind of a comparison. Another thing to consider is guys like Joseph Adai. Joseph Adai had a similar production profile as well in terms of having average total offensive market share production and average touchdown market share. Irving, though, has below average touchdown market share, and his total offensive market share isn't really that great. Another running back, Terrell Davis, a similar profile to, say, Joseph Adai, with not having as good of receiving market share for his data. I think the closest real comparison to Irving is a running back named Greg Bell. Kind of a oldie but a goodie name as a productive running back way back in the olden days of running back, the running back position in terms of that. But he's a good player in terms of that kind of perspective. So overall, most of the comparisons for Irving, again, guys like Kamara, Adai, Terrell Davis don't really match up to the reality of him because of his touchdown market share, but I still think it's important to mention them because they are in the same range as prospects. They had the similar knocks. They had the similar concerns based on their production profiles, if you will. Now, the overall outlook for Irving. Irving profiles as a backup to fringe receiving back Pro Bowler based on his data. The biggest red flags are his lack of total offensive market share production and touchdown production. Most prospects with this profile either become rotational slot back receivers or remain long-term backups, or they have the high-end outcomes such as the Alvin Kamaras and the Terrell Davises, and even the Joseph Adais to a certain extent. His athletic testing will be huge for his potential in the NFL. This is at most positions, though, but in terms of the running back position, it is definitely important that you get that athleticism testing exactly where it needs to be, because if he doesn't test well as an athlete, you might as well move on in many ways. And that's even for backs that are really productive. You do have to have that prerequisite athleticism to be a great player in the NFL in many ways. But overall, that is my production profile on Bucky Irving based on his overall data. I think there are some things to like about him. I can see what other people see in him because when you look at his receiving market share, it's fantastic. The NFL has not totally went goo goo gaga for this type of thing, and I think there is a place for him in the NFL as a rotational receiving back. But I would temper the expectations with him because he's not an every down back. And that's like a lot of prospects in this particular running back class, is they don't really do everything. They do one thing really well or two things really well, but they don't do everything well. And I think that's the kind of biggest concern with Bucky Irving. So with all that said, thank you so much for following this channel. My name is Jim Coburn, also known as Geometrics. You can follow my other work at Geometrics on Twitter, at JIMETRICS, also known as X. And you can also check me out on my Patreon, patreon.com/jcoburn, JCOBERN, to get more information as well. Other videos, a lot of my videos will drop there first before they go onto YouTube. So if you become a Patreon subscriber, you'll get to see a plethora of information before it actually hits the airways. And of course, player requests and everything else like that. So thank you guys so much for following my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!